Why Psalm 91 is the most important message for fear and anxiety. Don't ignore this. What if the fear you feel right now is not random? What if the anxiety that tightens your chest at night is not just emotional, but spiritual? There is a reason Psalm 91 has survived centuries of war, plagues, exile, and collapse. It is not a comforting poem. It is a strategic message, and most people misunderstand it. This psalm was never written for calm seasons. It was written for moments when danger is invisible, when threats move silently, when fear has no clear name. If you've been feeling overwhelmed, restless, or constantly alert, like something bad could happen at any moment, Psalm 91 speaks directly to you, not softly, not vaguely, but with precision. It does not promise a life without trouble. It reveals where safety truly exists when trouble is unavoidable. There is a reason ancient believers treated Psalm 91 as protection, not inspiration. A reason its words were whispered before battles, during disease, and in times of deep uncertainty. And here is the uncomfortable truth. Most people read Psalm 91 without entering it. They quote it, but they don't dwell in it. They admire it, but they don't activate it. Tonight we are not reading Psalm 91 as poetry. We are uncovering why this psalm is the most important message ever written for fear and anxiety, and why ignoring it may be the very reason fear keeps returning. Stay with me, because what you are about to understand changes how protection actually works. Psalm 91 was written for hidden threats, not visible danger. Psalm 91 opens with a statement that most people rush past, but everything depends on it. He who dwells in the secret place of the Most High. This is not poetic language, it is positional language. The psalm does not begin with protection, it begins with location. Fear and anxiety thrive when the threat is unclear, when danger has no face, when the mind keeps scanning for something it cannot name. That is exactly the environment Psalm 91 addresses. Notice the vocabulary: snare, terror by night, arrow by day, pestilence that stalks in darkness, destruction that lays waste at noonday. These are not loud, obvious attacks. They are hidden, silent, psychological, gradual. This is why Psalm 91 is not primarily about external chaos. It is about internal alertness. It speaks to the person who is constantly bracing for impact, even when nothing appears to be wrong. Anxiety is not the presence of danger. It is the anticipation of it. Psalm 91 confronts that anticipation directly. The phrase, dwells in the secret place, implies continuity. Not visiting, not quoting, dwelling. In ancient understanding, to dwell meant to settle your awareness, your trust, and your sense of safety in one place. Fear collapses when the nervous system no longer believes it is exposed. This is why Psalm 91 does not say, "Nothing bad will happen." Instead, it says, "You will not fear." The absence of fear comes before the absence of harm. That order matters. Most people try to remove fear by changing circumstances. Psalm 91 removes fear by changing where you are anchored. Hidden threats require hidden refuge. That is the logic of the psalm. If the danger is invisible, the protection cannot be physical alone. It must operate at the level of perception, awareness, and trust. This is why anxiety often persists even in safe environments, because safety was never about the environment to begin with. Psalm 91 reframes protection as proximity. He will abide under the shadow of the Almighty. A shadow only exists when you are close. This is not long-distance faith. It is relational positioning. Fear grows in distance. Peace grows in nearness. When people say Psalm 91 doesn't work, what they usually mean is that they tried to use it as a statement instead of entering it as a posture. The psalm does not function as a charm. It functions as a place of residence for the mind and spirit. Anxiety is what happens when the mind believes it is alone with its threats. Psalm 91 dismantles that belief at the root. It does not argue with fear. It replaces its foundation. And this is why Psalm 91 remains unmatched for fear and anxiety. It was never designed to calm surface emotions. It was written to reposition the inner world where fear is formed. If you understand this, the rest of the psalm changes completely. Fear loses authority when the mind learns where to remain. Fear does not begin with events. It begins with interpretation. Two people can face the same situation. One collapses inward, the other remains steady. The difference is not courage. It is where the mind has learned to remain. Psalm 91 addresses this directly, long before fear manifests as panic, restlessness, or exhaustion. The psalm repeatedly uses language of abiding, dwelling, trusting. These are not emotional states. They are mental disciplines. Fear gains authority when the mind becomes nomadic, jumping from possibility to possibility, rehearsing outcomes that have not happened, living mentally in futures that do not exist. Anxiety is not fear of the present. It is fear rehearsed in advance. Psalm 91 interrupts this pattern by anchoring attention. When it says, "I will say of the Lord, He is my refuge and my fortress," it is not describing optimism. It is describing self-directed alignment. The ancient mind understood that what you repeatedly declare is where your awareness settles. Fear feeds on scattered awareness. Protection requires focused residence. Notice how the psalm does not instruct the reader to fight fear. It never commands resistance. Instead, it removes fear's jurisdiction by removing its audience. Fear cannot dominate a mind that has learned where to stay. It needs attention to survive. This is why anxiety often spikes in moments of stillness. When external noise fades, the mind searches for threats. Psalm 91 retrains that reflex. It teaches the mind to remain under something greater rather than scanning what is smaller. Under His wings, you will find refuge. This is not metaphorical comfort. It is directional language. The mind is instructed where to rest. Modern anxiety is often treated as chemical imbalance or trauma response alone. While those factors matter, Psalm 91 addresses something deeper: the loss of internal shelter. A mind without shelter is always exposed, even in peace. This exposure creates hypervigilance, fatigue, and emotional burnout. Fear becomes powerful when it convinces the mind it must manage reality alone. Psalm 91 dismantles that belief. It introduces a shared burden model. My refuge, my fortress, my God, in whom I trust. Trust here is not blind belief. It is the decision to stop outsourcing safety to prediction and control. When the mind stops trying to foresee every danger, fear loses its leverage. This is why Psalm 91 repeatedly emphasizes deliverance from traps, not confrontation with them. You are not asked to identify every snare. You are promised removal from their path. Anxiety collapses when the responsibility to detect every threat is released. This is also why Psalm 91 speaks of angels bearing you up, not so you do not fall, but so your attention is no longer consumed by watching the ground. Fear keeps the eyes downward. Trust lifts the focus upward. Fear does not leave because you silence it. It leaves because it no longer governs where your mind lives. Psalm 91 trains the mind to remain somewhere fear cannot rule. And once the mind learns where to remain, anxiety begins to lose its voice. Why night? Fear is addressed. First in Psalm 91. Psalm 91 does something intentional and precise when it says, "You will not fear the terror of the night." Night fear is mentioned before daytime danger for a reason. Anxiety is not strongest when life is loud. It is strongest when everything becomes quiet. When distraction fades, unresolved thoughts rise. When the body rests, the mind often refuses to. Night is where fear operates without witnesses. There is no productivity to hide behind, no urgency to outrun thought. This is why anxiety intensifies at night. The nervous system finally stops reacting to the outside world and turns inward. Psalm 91 speaks directly into this moment. The phrase "terror of the night" does not refer to visible danger. It refers to anticipatory fear, the kind that appears without evidence. The mind begins to project tomorrow's problems, replay yesterday's mistakes, and invent outcomes that have not occurred. This is not weakness. It is an unguarded mind searching for certainty in the absence of control. Psalm 91 does not shame this condition. It neutralizes it. Notice that the psalm does not say the night will be silent or peaceful. It says you will not fear. The environment is not the focus. The internal response is. Night anxiety feels overwhelming because the mind believes it must resolve everything before rest is allowed. Psalm 91 challenges that belief. It introduces the concept of delegated vigilance. When it speaks of divine protection that does not sleep, it is not offering poetry. It is offering relief from responsibility. Anxiety persists when the mind believes it must stay alert to keep you safe. This is why Psalm 91 later reinforces the idea of unseen guardians. The message is clear. You are not the one assigned to watch the darkness. When the mind releases the illusion that it must stay awake to prevent harm, the body finally follows. Fear at night also feels more intense because imagination is strongest in darkness. Without visual input, the brain fills gaps with memory, trauma, and speculation. Psalm 91 does not attempt to correct those thoughts one by one. Instead, it repositions authority. He who dwells. The night does not define where you are. Your dwelling does. This is why Psalm 91 works when techniques fail. Techniques try to manage symptoms. Psalm 91 removes the cause, false responsibility for control. You are not asked to suppress thoughts. You are invited to rest in delegated protection. The absence of fear at night is not achieved by exhaustion. It is achieved by trust-based surrender. This is why so many people fall asleep more easily when they stop trying to solve their anxiety and start allowing safety to exist without explanation. Psalm 91 is not calming because it promises nothing will happen. It is calming because it declares that whatever happens does not require your constant vigilance. Night fear loses its power when the mind accepts that safety does not depend on staying awake. And once night fear is dismantled, daytime anxiety begins to weaken as well. The arrow by day explains why anxiety persists, even when life looks stable. After addressing the terror of the night, Psalm 91 immediately shifts to a different kind of fear. The arrow that flies by day. This transition is deliberate. Night fear is internal and anticipatory. Day fear is external, sudden, and often unexpected. Anxiety does not disappear when life becomes functional. It simply changes form. Daytime anxiety is quieter, but more deceptive. It shows up when routines are running, responsibilities are being met, and life appears under control. This is the anxiety of interruption, the fear that something could strike without warning and undo what has been built. Psalm 91 names this fear directly. An arrow is not a storm. It does not announce itself. It is fast, targeted, and often unseen until it arrives. This perfectly describes the anxiety many people carry during productive seasons. They are not afraid of collapse. They are afraid of disruption. Fear whispers, "Everything is fine. For now." Psalm 91 reframes this fear by exposing a hidden assumption, the belief that stability is maintained by constant alertness. Many people stay anxious because they think vigilance is the price of success. The psalm challenges that belief. It does not say arrows will not exist. It says they will not govern your fear. Day anxiety often comes from over-identification with outcomes. When identity is tied to performance, reputation, health, or provision, any threat feels existential. Psalm 91 quietly removes that pressure. Protection is not attached to achievement. It is attached to dwelling. This is why the psalm places both night and day fears under the same promise. Fear does not change nature based on time. It changes disguise. At night, it asks, "What if?" During the day, it asks, "What if this ends?" Psalm 91 interrupts this loop by shifting the source of safety away from predictability. The psalm never promises predictability. It promises coverage. There is a difference. Predictability requires control. Coverage requires trust. Many people remain anxious during good seasons because they are subconsciously waiting for the next arrow. This waiting becomes a mental posture. Psalm 91 dismantles that posture. It teaches that safety does not depend on spotting threats early. It depends on where you remain when threats exist. The arrow imagery also reveals something important. Arrows are external. They come from outside. Anxiety, however, often feels internal. Psalm 91 collapses that confusion. It reminds the reader that not every internal sensation is an internal truth. Fear can be triggered by imagined arrows that never arrive. This is why Psalm 91 does not instruct avoidance. It instructs assurance. The promise is not that arrows disappear, but that they lose authority over your internal state. Daytime anxiety fades when the mind no longer treats interruption as catastrophe. Psalm 91 replaces fear of disruption with confidence in continuity that is not self-maintained. When this understanding settles, anxiety no longer needs to guard the day, and this prepares the ground for the next layer of the psalm, where unseen threats are addressed directly. The pestilence that walks in darkness and the nature of chronic anxiety. Psalm 91 goes deeper when it speaks of the pestilence that stalks in darkness. This phrase is often misunderstood because people associate pestilence only with disease. In the original sense, pestilence represents something that spreads quietly, gradually, and invisibly, long before it is recognized as a threat. This is precisely how chronic anxiety develops. Unlike sudden fear, chronic anxiety does not announce itself. It does not arrive as panic. It grows slowly, integrating itself into thought patterns, routines, and expectations. People often say, "This is just how I am," without realizing that anxiety has been walking beside them for years. Psalm 91 addresses this condition directly. The phrase, "walks in darkness," is critical. Darkness here does not mean evil. It means unexamined space. Anxiety becomes chronic when it is normalized and left unchallenged. It walks, not runs. It adapts. It learns the rhythms of the mind and blends in until it feels permanent. Psalm 91 does not attempt to expose every symptom. Instead, it removes the environment anxiety needs to survive. Chronic anxiety feeds on isolation, on the belief that no one sees the internal struggle. The psalm counters this by asserting constant awareness and presence. Darkness does not mean absence of oversight. This is why reassurance alone rarely cures long-term anxiety. Saying everything will be fine does nothing to a mind shaped by repetition. Psalm 91 works differently. It reframes reality at the root. If anxiety has been walking unnoticed, protection must operate continuously, not reactively. Notice that the psalm does not call the reader to vigilance against pestilence. It does not say, "Watch carefully." It says, "You will not fear." Fear is the environment pestilence needs. When fear is removed, anxiety loses its ability to spread. Chronic anxiety often masquerades as responsibility. People believe they are being prudent, cautious, or realistic. Psalm 91 exposes this illusion gently. Constant internal tension is not wisdom. It is a burden never meant to be carried alone. The promise of Psalm 91 is not instant relief. It is containment. Pestilence is neutralized not by force, but by boundaries. When anxiety encounters a mind that no longer treats it as normal, its influence weakens. This is why Psalm 91 remains effective across generations. It does not chase symptoms. It removes the conditions that allow anxiety to persist unnoticed. It reminds the reader that darkness does not belong to fear. It belongs to the absence of light, and light does not require effort to function. When chronic anxiety is no longer allowed to walk unchallenged, its authority dissolves. And with that authority gone, the psalm moves to its next revelation. Why numbers, scale, and surrounding chaos no longer define personal safety. 1,000 may fall at your side. Why comparison fuels modern anxiety. When Psalm 91 declares, 1,000 may fall at your side, 10,000 at your right hand, but it will not come near you. It introduces one of the most misunderstood ideas in the entire psalm. This line is not about immunity from reality. It is about liberation from comparison. Anxiety intensifies when the mind interprets safety through numbers. Statistics, trends, probabilities, and collective outcomes dominate modern thinking. The question becomes, If it happened to them, why wouldn't it happen to me? Psalm 91 confronts this logic directly. It does not deny mass events. It denies their authority over personal peace. Fear grows when the mind assumes proximity equals destiny. Watching others fall, financially, emotionally, physically, creates a false sense of inevitability. Anxiety feeds on this assumption. Psalm 91 breaks it. It draws a boundary between observation and participation. Seeing is not the same as inheriting. This verse is psychologically precise. Anxiety often spikes during times of widespread crisis because the mind collapses individual experience into collective fate. The psalm refuses that collapse. It does not isolate the believer from reality. It isolates fear from relevance. The phrase "at your side" is important. Anxiety becomes most powerful when danger feels close, not distant. The psalm acknowledges closeness without surrendering to it. Proximity does not equal permission. Just because fear surrounds you does not mean it enters you. Modern anxiety is often amplified by constant exposure, news cycles, social feeds, stories of collapse. The mind was not designed to absorb infinite suffering without boundaries. Psalm 91 provides those boundaries. It teaches discernment between awareness and absorption. This is not denial. It is selective engagement. The psalm does not instruct ignorance. It instructs focus. You are allowed to witness without internalizing. Anxiety fades when the mind no longer treats every external event as a personal forecast. The promise, "It will not come near you," is not arrogance. It is alignment. Safety is not random, it is relational. The psalm consistently ties protection to dwelling, not deserving. This removes the exhausting pressure of measuring oneself against outcomes. Comparison fuels anxiety because it erases context. Psalm 91 restores context by narrowing the lens back to personal positioning. You are not responsible for interpreting the entire world. You are responsible for where you remain internally. This is why people feel calmer when they stop tracking everything that could go wrong. It is not ignorance, it is wisdom. Psalm 91 validates this instinct long before modern psychology named it. When the mind stops using other people's outcomes as a metric for its own safety, fear loses one of its strongest reinforcements. And once comparison no longer governs the mind, the psalm reveals the next layer of protection, one that operates without visibility or effort. Unseen assistance. Why anxiety weakens when control is released. Psalm 91 introduces a concept that directly confronts one of anxiety's deepest roots, the belief that safety depends on personal control. For he will command his messengers concerning you, to guard you in all your ways. This is not mystical imagery meant to impress. It is structural language meant to reassign responsibility. Anxiety persists when the mind believes it must oversee every outcome. Control becomes a survival strategy. Even when it fails, it feels safer than surrender. Psalm 91 dismantles this strategy by introducing help that operates without supervision. The assistance described is unseen, unmonitored, and unrequested. That alone challenges the anxious mind. Notice the wording, commanded, not consulted. Protection is not reactive to fear, it is already in motion. This matters because anxiety feeds on the idea that danger is always one step ahead. Psalm 91 reverses that timeline. Safeguards are already positioned before threats arise. The phrase "in all your ways" removes another source of anxiety, the fear of making the wrong choice. Many people remain anxious not because of what is happening, but because of what they might do incorrectly. The psalm does not promise error-free decisions. It promises guidance that operates within movement, not paralysis. Anxious minds often hesitate, overanalyze, and delay action to avoid risk. Psalm 91 removes the illusion that stillness equals safety. Protection accompanies motion. This is liberating for those trapped in indecision fueled by fear of consequences. Unseen assistance also addresses a subtle form of pride, disguised as responsibility. The belief that, if I don't manage this, it will fall apart, places unbearable pressure on the self. Psalm 91 corrects this gently. You are not the sole guardian of your life. Anxiety decreases when that burden is removed. The idea of being borne up carries psychological weight. It implies support without effort. Anxiety exhausts the mind because it is always bracing for impact. The psalm describes a reality where impact is not something you are meant to absorb alone. This does not eliminate awareness, it eliminates obsession. The mind is allowed to function without constant threat assessment. This is why people often feel calmer when they accept help they cannot fully explain. The nervous system relaxes when it no longer carries total accountability. Psalm 91 does not ask you to visualize protection or maintain faith through strain. It declares protection as an established order. Anxiety weakens when safety is no longer something you must manufacture. The unseen nature of this help is intentional. If protection were always visible, control would return to the observer. The psalm removes that temptation. Trust replaces surveillance. When the mind accepts assistance it does not manage, fear begins to loosen its grip. And with control released, Psalm 91 moves to its next confrontation, where fear tries to return through confrontation, and confrontation is stripped of its power. Confrontation without fear. Why threats lose their power when faced properly. Psalm 91 reaches a turning point when it introduces direct confrontation. You will tread on the lion and the cobra, the young lion and the serpent, you will trample underfoot. This is not a call to aggression. It is a declaration of reversed hierarchy. Fear loses power when what once intimidated no longer occupies a higher position in the mind. Anxiety often survives not because danger is overwhelming, but because it is perceived as superior. Threats feel larger, stronger, and more authoritative than the individual facing them. Psalm 91 corrects this perception. The imagery of trampling is not about violence, it is about relative position. What is underfoot no longer governs direction. Lions and serpents represent different kinds of fear. The lion is obvious, loud, and intimidating, external threats that announce themselves. The serpent is subtle, hidden, and deceptive, internal fears that whisper rather than roar. Anxiety thrives when either is allowed to dictate behavior. Psalm 91 addresses both simultaneously, removing their psychological advantage. The psalm does not promise the absence of confrontation. It promises the absence of dominance. This distinction matters. Avoidance strengthens fear. Proper confrontation, when grounded in assurance rather than panic, diminishes it. Psalm 91 reframes confrontation as inevitable but non-defining. Many anxious individuals fear fear itself. They worry about how they will respond if something goes wrong. Psalm 91 removes this secondary anxiety. It does not say you will feel brave. It says you will stand above the threat regardless of feeling. Authority here is positional, not emotional. This is why the psalm places this verse after establishing dwelling, trust, and unseen support. Confrontation without foundation breeds trauma. Confrontation from stability breeds confidence. Psalm 91 builds the internal structure first, then introduces challenge. The language of treading implies movement, not stagnation. Anxiety often freezes the mind. Fear convinces people to stop advancing until certainty is restored. Psalm 91 rejects that pause. Movement itself becomes proof that fear no longer governs decision-making. Importantly, the psalm does not instruct the reader to identify every threat before acting. It assumes threats will appear along the way. Protection is not contingent on preparedness. It is embedded in progress. This dismantles the anxious need to foresee every possible outcome. Fear loses its grip when the mind stops granting it veto power. Psalm 91 restores forward momentum by stripping fear of its authority to delay, intimidate, or dominate. Confrontation no longer signals danger, it signals alignment. When fear is no longer elevated, it becomes navigable rather than paralyzing. This prepares the reader for the most personal promise in the psalm, where protection shifts from general assurance to direct affirmation. When identity is sealed, fear loses its final argument. Psalm 91 changes its tone here, and this shift is intentional. Until now, the psalm has spoken about protection. Now it speaks from relationship. Because he has set his love upon me, therefore I will deliver him. This is not negotiation, it is confirmation. Fear survives where identity is unstable. Anxiety feeds on the question, am I safe because of what I do, or in spite of what I fail to do? Psalm 91 resolves this tension. Deliverance is not presented as a reward for performance, discipline, or vigilance. It flows from attachment. To set one's love is not emotional perfection. It is orientation, direction, choice. Anxiety weakens when the mind stops dividing its trust between multiple sources of safety. When identity is scattered, fear multiplies. When identity is anchored, fear runs out of arguments. This is the moment where protection becomes personal, not general, not theoretical. The psalm moves from what happens to who you are. I will set him on high. Height here is not status, it is perspective. Anxiety keeps the mind low, close to threat. Identity lifts the mind above constant evaluation. And then comes recognition. He knows my name. In ancient understanding, knowing a name meant alignment, not information. It meant familiarity without fear. Anxiety thrives in the unknown. When relationship replaces uncertainty, fear loses its authority to define the future. This is where prayer becomes inevitable, not as ritual, but as response. So now, let the words settle. Let us release the weight of self-protection. Let us step out of constant alertness. Let us allow identity to be sealed, not strained. We release the need to control every outcome. We release the belief that peace must be earned. We release the fear that safety depends on vigilance. Here, anxiety is not fought, it is outgrown. Here, fear is not silenced, it is displaced. And as identity settles, something else begins to shift. The future no longer feels hostile. Tomorrow no longer feels like a threat waiting to unfold. There is a new awareness forming, one that does not ask what if anymore. Because when attachment is clear, the future is no longer uncertain. This is why Psalm 91 does not end here. It moves forward, toward time, toward continuity, toward a life not merely rescued from fear, but satisfied, sustained, and shown what true deliverance looks like across years, not moments. And that is where the final promise begins. Long life, satisfaction, and the end of fear as a governing force. Psalm 91 does not conclude with urgency. It concludes with stability. With long life, I will satisfy him and show him my salvation. This final promise is not about escaping danger. It is about redefining what the future represents. Anxiety collapses when the future is no longer perceived as hostile territory. Fear survives on the assumption that safety is temporary. Even moments of peace feel fragile to an anxious mind. Psalm 91 dismantles this assumption by introducing continuity. Long life here is not merely extended time. It is sustained assurance. It is life experienced without constant anticipation of collapse. The word satisfy is crucial. Anxiety often allows survival, but steals fulfillment. People endure days instead of inhabiting them. Psalm 91 restores the expectation that peace is not a break between crises, but a legitimate state of existence. Satisfaction signals completeness, nothing missing, nothing looming. And then comes visibility. I will show him my salvation. Anxiety feeds on ambiguity. It thrives where reassurance is abstract. Psalm 91 ends by promising lived evidence. Protection becomes experiential, not theoretical. Over time, repeated safety weakens fear's credibility. This is where fear finally loses its position as a governing force, not because danger disappears, but because history replaces speculation. The anxious mind predicts. Psalm 91 invites the mind to remember. What has been carried through no longer needs to be feared again. The future, once a source of tension, becomes neutral, and then hopeful. Tomorrow is no longer a question mark. It is an extension of a pattern already proven. Anxiety fades when the mind no longer feels responsible for guarding what time will bring. Importantly, Psalm 91 does not end with instruction. There is no final command, no requirement to maintain peace through effort. The psalm closes with a declaration. Peace is not sustained by vigilance, it is sustained by alignment. Long life also implies growth. Fear weakens as trust matures. Confidence replaces hypervigilance. Rest replaces rehearsal. Psalm 91 trusts this progression. It does not rush resolution, it establishes rhythm. This is why Psalm 91 is the most important message for fear and anxiety. It does not teach avoidance, it teaches freedom from governance. Fear may still appear, but it no longer decides direction. When fear no longer governs, clarity returns. Rest becomes possible. Life expands. Psalm 91 does not promise a life without shadows. It promises a life where shadows no longer determine how you walk forward.